Discover over 100 episodes of Bartholomew Town on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Bartholomew Town podcast.
Is a vast improvement over where we were just a few years ago. So we're making progress. Can people criticize us? Sure. But are there things we need to improve? Sure. Where isn't there something you can improve? But we are focused on making the system work.
Welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomew Town podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. On today's episode, I sit down with retired judge and vice chair of the Rhode Island Board of Elections, Steve Erickson. And his LinkedIn profile says he flunked retirement. That seems about right when you head over to his Twitter handle. Steve Erickson, a vocal member of the Rhode Island Board of Elections in terms of social media presence, and in a state where there's legacy issues when it comes to process, notwithstanding the Board of Elections. And there's plenty of critics of the Board of Elections today, but really good to get Steve's perspective on the improvements that have been made and the current state of elections in Rhode Island. I actually began the conversation with a rather generic question, an assumption, if you will, that Rhode Island elections are in a good place. So stick around for a few moments, and you'll hear Steve Erickson one-on-one right here at the Loft, talking elections and much more. Support for Bartholomew Town comes from Lagunitas Brewing Company, helping to present Elmwood Songwriters Club, a recurring performance series featuring intimate sets by Rhode Island artists from a variety of communities, held at the Bartholomew Town Loft in the Elmwood neighborhood of Providence. Remember, new episodes of Bartholomew Town every Tuesday and Friday. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast app or discover at bartholomewtown.com and ripodcast.com. Reach me anytime, Bill at ripodcast.com, or follow me on Twitter at Bill Bartholomew. Okay, without further ado, my conversation with Steve Erickson. All right, so we're here at the Loft talking elections, the Board of Elections, all the good stuff in Rhode Island. And you've had criticism lobbed at you from or at least the Board of Elections has, from kind of both sides of the spectrum. Generally speaking, though, we've got fair, free, open elections here in Rhode Island, and when there's a problem of any kind, it seems to be remedied. Is that, the very most basic statement you could make about your area? Is that a fair one?
That's fair. It's fair because, first of all, there was a long period of time when things were not well executed. And over the last few years, we've really made a turnaround in both the election side, because we handle the election process, but also in the campaign finance side. They're two separate sets of issues, but they both needed a lot of attention. We've given them that attention. We've improved the security of the election system with the risk-limiting audit proposal that we have in place. And we've focused a lot on cybersecurity. On the campaign finance side, we have been significantly improving our ability to work with people to get reports filed on time. The delinquency rate for reports has gone from 25% down to 10%. We're working on that last 10. We do a lot of education. We do a lot of assistance. And when we have to, we do enforcement. So it's an organization, when you're running elections, nobody's ever going to be happy, and everybody's going to be unhappy with the outcome if they lose. I understand that. When I was in the legislature for 8 years myself, back in the late 70s, early 80s, and my first election I won by 2 votes. So I'm very focused on making sure that every vote counts and that we ensure that people have the opportunity to vote and that we count them correctly.
And then on the campaign finance side, that's obviously something that evolves as the entities that give and receive money and trades and other sorts of contributions, let's say.
People are not very focused when they run for office on all the details, it seems, of what you have to do to stay in compliance with the campaign finance laws in terms of how things are reported and so forth. So we keep a close eye on the reports that come in as best we can with the staff we have, in making sure that if there are major errors or inconsistencies, that we try and figure out where they are and how they happen and work with the people to fix those things. Where we really could use, one area that we could use more help with in terms of staffing, for example, is in education. In Massachusetts, they have a system where you cannot collect $1 until your treasurer has taken an online course and certified that they understand the campaign finance laws, which seems to me to be a pretty useful step in making sure that people understand what they have to do in order to comply with the law. So we're there to educate and to enforce when necessary.
Is there an educational component like that in Rhode Island that someone who's running for office, right out of the gate, step one, make sure you get this as a basic understanding of what it takes to be compliant?
We have materials online. We have printed documents. They are helpful. We answer questions. Our staff is very receptive and open to working with people to figure out how to do certain things. But again, the more you do, the better the outcome. And we're doing what we can with what we have. Would we like to do more? Absolutely. Are we trying to do more? Yes.
Oh, we got,
but the fact of the matter is, there are always going to be people who criticize us for political purposes and who find some advantage out of being a critic.
Right. That's that. Well, in anything, I suppose. But
right.
What about early voting? Some of the changes to the emergency voting or the manipulation of that, that some have criticized. What's your take on that?
Well, the board has been very much in favor of early voting. And what that means is that with an early voting system, you go to a voting location up to, in some cases, the average is almost 20 days before the election, and you cast your ballot, just like you would on election day. You go in, you present your ID, you sign the poll pad, you get a ballot, and you cast it, and it's run through the machine. And you don't have to have an excuse or an explanation. People just vote early, and it's very popular across the country. It's very popular. More people use it every year in the states that allow it. So the Secretary of State and the board has been very focused on trying to bring early voting to Rhode Island. We have also looked at a particular problem that is the problem of emergency mail ballots. A few years ago, the legislature made emergency mail ballots available to anybody who declared that they did not think that they were going to be able to get to the polls, or they weren't sure they were going to be able to get to the polls. That has exploded the use of emergency mail ballots. In some communities, such as Westerly, they actually print the mail ballot application along with their voter information pamphlet and encourage everybody to vote by mail.
Right, they had a lot of charter questions.
Right, they had 50 some odd questions, so they said vote by mail. Don't go to the polling place. The problem is those ballots aren't counted when they're cast. The person goes in, casts the emergency mail ballot, it goes into an envelope. The envelope is held there, and then at some point it's brought up to the State Board of Elections, and we have to open them and review them all and then run them through machines. The last election cycle, we had somewhere over 3,000 mail ballots come in on Election Day. And it was a crisis for us. We expect far more than that in 2020 because of the level of interest in the election and the fact that it's a presidential election, so turnout will be up. So we face a crisis about that. So if we can't get early voting, what we would like is to be able to have the DS-200s, which is the machine that your ballot goes through, in the cities and towns, so that when somebody casts an emergency mail ballot, that vote can go through the machine right away. 1, you know the vote's been counted. 2, you know that the ballot was correctly cast in the sense that there's no overvote or other stray mark that would cause the ballot to be rejected. So, and 3, it means it doesn't have to come to the Board of Elections on Election Day or within a few days before the election in order to be opened and counted. Because then if the ballot is an overvote, it doesn't count for that race. If somebody is supposed to vote for 5 council candidates, they vote for 6, none of the votes count. If it went through the DS-200, the DS-200 would kick it back and say you overvoted, vote for 5, so your vote would count. So allowing the voting machines into the cities and towns is a way of making sure that people's ballots count, that their votes count.
We had a special election yesterday. Any problems?
Not that we know of.
We're talking about the Woonsocket. Yeah,
right.
It seems like
a
clear.
We reviewed yesterday at our meeting the various the ballots, whether there were any issues. There were no contested ballots. One of the things we've done, and we did it by regulation, is it always concerned me that if you sent your mail ballot by mail and the witnesses didn't give their complete address, or it wasn't signed, or it wasn't notarized, that the ballot would simply be rejected. And so a lot of ballots were tossed on that basis, or sometimes because of a lack of a good signature match. What we've done by regulation is say, when we get ballots like that now, we notify the person that there's a problem with their ballot, and they can come in and file an affidavit saying, yeah, that's my ballot. And so more votes will get counted that way. And that's our objective, after all, is to make sure all legitimately cast votes are counted. So,
Right.
So we've taken steps like that to make the system more open and more accessible to people.
What kind of relationship do you have with the Secretary of State as far as working on all of these, this notion of
Right.
trying to have the best possible, the fairest, freest election?
We have a good relationship with the Secretary of State. We have a good relationship with the Attorney General on the enforcement side, and those are positive things. One of the things I think that's different now than, say, 4 years ago, or when I first started on the board, until we changed executive directors, was that now we really feel that there's more of a team approach in how we address these things. The collaboration between the Secretary of State, the Board of Elections, our staff, the Attorney General, to resolve these matters is a vast improvement over where we were just a few years ago. So we're making progress. Are we, can people criticize us? Sure. But are there things we need to improve? Sure. Where isn't there something you can improve? But we are focused on making the system work as best as it can. That's our goal.
What do you look to in terms of, I suppose I should say, do you look at the possibility of some kind of mobile voting, any kind of, we see the technology with gaming. Is there any indication that we're going to be moving towards something
Online?
hyper-digital online voting?
Not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I just, when you read the cybersecurity briefings, there's just too much potential for a problem there. The Election Assistance Agency, the federal agency that is making recommendations, has a set of standards. And the recent Senate Intelligence Committee report on election interference that was issued last week, and that Senator Reid had a press conference about, both say that you need to have a paper ballot, a paper trail. One of the best forms of security is what we have, which is we have a paper trail. Everybody has their ballot. We keep the ballots. The machines actually make copies of the ballots. So not only do we have the original ballots, we have digital copies of all the ballots. And we have a risk-limiting audit system afterwards that is designed to make sure that the machines properly counted the ballots. So by doing statistical analysis on the ballots themselves, you can determine whether or not there was some flaw in the counting system. So that's a higher level of security. If you go to online voting, you can't have any of that.
Right.
It's the Wild West.
Right. Maybe the blockchain technology gets involved.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I have some computer expertise, but that's beyond me. I rely on the experts and what they tell me.
Looking back in Rhode Island history, you'd mentioned there had been, checkered or some unfavorable aspects to Rhode Island elections. Is there anything specific that comes up? Anything that you look at the Bloodless Revolution, something happened there that was wacky in the 1930s that obviously allowed for almost 100 years of one-party rule.
Right, yeah.
I mean, but generally speaking, has that been something that contributes to Rhode Island history that there's been that just on a historical basis you might have information on that I don't?
Well, the reality is that in the past, the process was a lot less secure and a lot less monitored. And there was, of course, the infamous case back, I think it was in the 70s, early 80s, involving parts of South Providence where mail ballots were being picked up, as it were. Not just picked up, but being voted by people that didn't exist. So we have, between the Secretary of State working on the voter lists and our management of election technology, I don't think it's possible to do that anymore. The problem you have with election security is a very simple one, and that is you can guarantee that there are absolutely no incorrect votes cast, or you can guarantee the highest level of accessibility to the election by the voters. You can't guarantee both. If you make the system too hard to participate in, people are going to be discouraged from voting. They'll walk out of the system. They won't participate. On the other hand, you have to make sure that any problems that arise are so minuscule is that they generally won't have an impact on the election. And so it's finding that balance that policymakers have to achieve, all the while making sure that people feel comfortable with the process, that they understand that we are doing the best job we can to make the elections as fair and as open and as accessible as possible, while guarding against possible fraud. The reports that come out make it very clear that in-person voter fraud, where somebody votes for another person, is virtually non-existent. You have to ask yourself, why would you do that? Why would anyone go around trying to cast a vote for somebody else? So when the probability of getting caught is actually pretty high, I liken it to trying to make $1 million robbing banks $1 at a time. You can't. You're not really going to change. You don't know which elections are going to be close, so you don't know whether it makes any difference or not. So why are you doing something that has no impact and doesn't have any perceived advantage to anybody in the system? So when we hear people talking about double voting or fraudulent in-person voting, that doesn't happen. The biggest problem is disinformation about the elections. That's where the cybersecurity problems come in. That it's a much more serious problem that foreign actors, bad actors, are out there trying to influence voters, trying to spread disinformation, trying to create chaos in the system. And that's what we have to primarily be worried about, because that's wholesale rather than retail in terms of its impact on elections.
Yeah, and I mean, you hear so much about, on talk radio or in other areas, you'd hear a lot about, Central Falls, they're going out there, they're giving out emergency mail ballots, they're making it so they are buying Democratic votes or whatever it is. But, then you look down, as you'd mentioned, to Westerly, where
same thing's
happening. You don't hear anything about it. So
you don't hear anything about it.
Then you go, okay, I get what this is all about, really.
And then you have people who lose an election, and they immediately say it's fraud. And we had that a couple of years ago, where everybody was saying, not everybody, but there were people who were saying, this can't be right, this result. And I think you know what I'm talking about. So they ordered a copy of every single ballot under the open records law, right? And I'm not going to say who ordered it, because this isn't about who did it. It's about what was done and how it was done. So our staff spent countless hours copying every single ballot in that particular race. And then after a week or so it died down, they weren't interested in it anymore. They never picked up the ballots. We still have them sitting in a room somewhere, and they never paid us for them either. So, but they got the headline on election night, "We think there's fraud." So if you want headlines, you can say anything you want. If you want reality, it's going to be a lot more dull.
Right. And a lot of this stuff is dull, and at the end of the day, I mean, it's engaging, it's civics, right. But it's from the outside looking in, I mean, it is counting ballots.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's counting ballots. Yeah, but last night, for example, at the board, we were having this very complex discussion about the security impact of utilizing outflowing modems from the voting machines to transmit results, and whether or not it created a security risk, and whether we should find an alternative method of transporting results that has an equally high level of security. So you're weighing different security options, and a lot of it's very technical. It's not like it was before when everybody either counted paper ballots, or back when I started, we used these giant mechanical machines, which you may have seen pictures of.
I think
giant lever.
Yeah, I've been in one of those when I was a little kid. I remember. I think it must have been a Reagan election.
And,
I poked my head in.
And they were very susceptible to problems of all sorts. So it was great that we got rid of those, but that level of technology would just totally be unacceptable today. So we've made a lot of progress, but there's always more to do. That's the reality, and you never are satisfied with what you've done, and you're satisfied that you've done it, but you're not satisfied that it's enough, and that's the key to this, I guess.
Absolutely. It's probably the Bush won election too on my end. That I was not Reagan. I was born in '84, so that doesn't make much sense. But looking at the discussion on bad actors, foreign actors, that's often thought of in terms of the disruption of the presidential race, and so on and so forth. But that could impact a city council race just the same on a local level. Is that something that the Board of Elections at least has some oversight on?
Yes, because there are ways to disrupt local elections. I'm not going to explain to your audience all of them. From what we've been told,
out there, maniacs.
But the bottom line is the same kind of disinformation can be distributed about when elections are. Election's been postponed to Wednesday. Where you vote, you don't vote here, you go vote somewhere else, and then you lead voters around on a chase. Disinformation about candidates that comes out at the last minute. It isn't just foreign nationals that can be bad actors in this. We've seen a lot of folks over the years who specialize in, as they say, dirty tricks when it comes to elections. So the nature of our society, the nature of communications today, amplifies the ability to do that far beyond what it was when back in 1978, when I first ran for office, when I first was elected, and you were basically distributing flyers door to door, and that was your campaign. That things have changed a lot.
Absolutely. We just saw in the special election in Woonsocket, there was some criticism of a Valley Breeze piece that ran on Thursday that the Democratic candidate, I actually don't know. There was it was a nonpartisan race.
Nonpartisan.
But anyway, the progressive Democratic kid running, Alex Kites, he complained that he didn't have equal time. Is equal time something that is on your radar screen as well?
No, that doesn't
even
anymore.
exist at all.
No. That's why the equal time doctrine, after it was eliminated, allowed for the growth of one-sided perspectives in the media. And I don't know whether equal time was good or bad, but clearly today the media environment is very different. And you have to rely, especially with the press, under the First Amendment, on self-policing with respect to that to a large degree. I read the materials, I read about that, but that's not within our purview. That's really constitutionally protected speech, even if you don't agree with it.
Right. The next special election will be to replace now former Councilman Aponte here in Providence.
Right.
That's just announced for October or November.
I think so. Yeah, we have three other special elections coming up. I think they're referenda, but we do have things coming up in East Greenwich and North Kingstown and somewhere else. I'm not sure. Westerly.
So when a referendum is posed in a municipality, a special election can take place just on that one question.
Right. Some cities and towns do referenda, whether they're bond referenda or their charter amendments. They may do all sorts of different things on a municipal election basis, and we oversee that. But it's run by the city or town board of canvassers. The race for the council seat in Providence will be overseen initially by the board of canvassers, and then we. Some people don't get this, but the Board of Elections is the appellate. You don't come to us first, generally, on most cases. You go to the city or town Board of Canvassers, and then we review those decisions if we need to, if anybody has a problem with it.
voter registration drives, that's more the Secretary of State's purview, I suppose, but it must matter to you at heart. I mean, you don't want too many ballots to count, right, on the one hand, but you want all the ballots to count that you can on the other hand, of course.
Voter registration drives, I've always thought were a good thing. Some people apparently don't like them anymore for some reason that I can't figure out. But voter registration drives by groups, like the League of Women Voters, even, Common Cause, doesn't matter to me, ACLU, whoever wants to go out and register voters. Obviously, the people that are most interested in registering voters are the people that are running for election. And there are processes in place to make sure that the registrations are legitimate. We have a voter ID law in this state. It is a very expansive law, so it is probably one of the easiest states to produce an ID in of all the states that have voter identification laws. So we're not looking at outright fraud. We're just looking at people who are trying to get folks registered, which is a good thing. One state, I think it's North Dakota, doesn't have registration at all. And there have been academic questions about why we even have a registration system. We had a monitor in our election, a foreign election monitor. I'll bet you didn't know we had those. But we cooperate in a system where we had monitors from Ireland and Germany in our last election to come in and watch us.
Here in Rhode Island?
Here in Rhode Island, yes.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. I've never heard any anecdote about that. That's a fascinating story. That'd be the Boston Globe. That's something Ed Fitzpatrick, he would follow that guy from Ireland around on election. That'd
absolutely.
Be his piece.
Yeah, and so we had a good set of meetings with the election evaluators from foreign countries. And Germany, neither Germany nor Ireland have voter registration. Of course, the downside of it is in Germany, you have to register in the town you live, and that constitutes your automatic voter registration. So, and we don't have that. So clearly, but there are a lot of different ways that issue can be approached.
Last question, party registration, the registering for a party at the same time as you're registering to vote. I remember when I was in high school, I did pre-registration.
Yes.
I checked independent. I've never, other than going in to vote in primaries, I've stayed that way since. But I know a lot of people probably feel compelled to join a political party at that point. I'm not against political parties or anything like that. I'm not saying that in that context. I'm just saying, is there room for separation there, that voting and being a citizen and then joining a faction, should those be separate processes, or is it just simpler to do it this way?
Voter party affiliation is a lot more fluid than it used to be. People don't identify in a hardcore fashion with a particular party as much. So most people wind up being registered as unaffiliated.
Yeah. Or unaffiliated is actually what I checked off, right?
Right.
Yep.
And so that's... and over the years, there were a lot of efforts to make sure that only party members could vote in party primaries. And I think we're seeing a reverse trend now, because people tend to go into a party primary, especially in the presidential level, to vote for an individual rather than as a member of that party. They would prefer to see that party nominate that particular candidate. And so there are changes that are underway and have been enacted that make it a little bit easier to flow back and forth depending upon what your particular point of view is at any time and how you feel connected to a particular candidate, which is good.
And I wonder how much of Matt Brown's percentage of collection of votes that he collected were people from, that were ultimately going to support Alan Fung, that said, hell, let's go in there and we'll vote, we'll get Brown, he'll beat Governor Raimondo, and then all of a sudden we'll have a clear path to victory for Patricia Morgan or whatever it is.
I don't think that happens.
There's no way. Yeah, it seems it seems like a very large
unlikely
waste of time for an individual,
that
like you mentioned.
I mean, people always say that things like that happen with a convenient lack of evidence.
Right.
So, as I've said, an opinion without evidence is a fantasy.
Right.
So, show me the evidence. Show me some documentation. Show me some way in which this actually has an impact, and there's no evidence it does.
There's not even anecdotal evidence that can be produced on that one. I thought about it myself as when I went to vote this last go-around. I said in the primary, I voted in one of the two primaries, and when I was there, I thought about, who amongst me right now really is into this and who amongst me right now is trying to play defense.
Okay. The plural of anecdote is not data.
Yep.
We everybody hears stories, but the question is, you can research these things, and some people have spent their whole lives as experts, actual real experts, studying elections, and they reach conclusions. And I tend to go with the guy that actually has studied something all their life than somebody who says, well, I heard that X happened. Who are you going to believe?
As always, thanks for spending part of your day listening to the Bartholomew Town Podcast. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday, and over 100 episodes waiting for you in the back catalog. Until next time, I'm Bill Bartholomew. We'll talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.